Welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 28 August 2022. It is episode 237. We've got Van Gogh versus AI, online safety in California, bad iOS apps, Japanese floppy disk wars, Chile, Instagram, and all the show wrap-ups.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cyber criminals are hiding in the conversation. Cyber criminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of the 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection by going and getting your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. All right, I'm Doug White, and this is Security Weekly News wrap-up show, episode 237. On Application Security Weekly, number 210, Joe, John, and Mike had Doug Dooley, the COO at Data Theorem, on the show. And Doug was on to talk about what are your primary needs for cloud security. So, basically, as we all start moving in that direction, what's going on. They talked about misconfigurations, remediation of vulnerabilities, compliance, and CNAP. The Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, which is what CNAP stands for. If you are working on moving to the cloud, or you're thinking about moving to the cloud, it's definitely a segment to check out. Or if you're already using the cloud, because we always see those unprotected bit buckets and things. In the second segment, the AppSec news. On Business Security Weekly 275, Jason, Matt, and Tyler had on Brad Thies, the founder and president at Bar Advisory. Brad was going to talk about cybersecurity scorecards, which is an interesting thing that I have worked with long ago before it was called anything like that. They also talked about KPS, which is a way to help evaluate cyber programs, and provided a bunch of examples of real-world usage of these kind of techniques and how they kind of work. They also talked about which metrics you need to use that are the most valuable when you're actually doing these kind of scorecard evaluations. So a pretty interesting segment that everybody probably should consider. In the second segment, the leadership and communication news. On Enterprise Security Weekly 287, Joe, Tyler, Robinson, Katie, and Tyler Shield, we had all the Tylers there, had on Jeff Orloff, a technical evangelist and VP of product at Range Force. They were talking about how security tools and training don't really help if the humans don't understand the tool, which actually makes a lot of sense, and is also the reason why I shot a piece of wood through the back wall of my building one time using a router. Not that kind of router, but like a router that routes wood. Yeah, I didn't know how to use the thing. And, I was trying to use it, but it actually blew a hole in the wall. I should have read the instructions first. But, if you don't understand it, you may not use the tool, or you incorrectly use the tool, and all those things lead to serious problems. In the second segment, Paul Roberts, the founder at Secure Repairs, was on. Paul talked about the state of device security in IoT, which I think we all know is not good, and how manufacturers resisting right to repair mandates, which there's a whole lot to unpack there. But, right to repair is this idea that a company says, yeah, you can't work on this. John Deere has had a lot of things with that and a lot of IoT stuff. But the manufacturers resisting right to repair laws hinders device security efforts because the manufacturers continually limit access to updates, tools, and parts, and won't let you install those updates, and how that can lead, of course, to people just simply not updating things at all. In the third segment, Enterprise Security News. On Security Weekly News, number 236, Jason talked about Proofpoint and PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers report, describing watering hole attacks that were pushing Scanbox Keylogger. It was an interesting article. And on Paul's Security Weekly number 754, John Hammond, the senior security researcher at Huntress, was the guest. John was on talking about training and education and how it doesn't really have to be a difficult problem. So A lot of people ask, I get calls about this. A lot of people ask you questions about training and education. So interesting segment to check out. And in the second segment, the security week, the cyber security news. Blah, blah, blah. My threat of the week is going to be children's online safety. That sounds like a strange thing, right? I mean, it was like, that's one of those things that everybody ought to be for, I mean, like somebody says children's online safety and everybody goes, yay, you've got to do that. It's the flag, the flag and country bill. Well, California, love it or hate it. And I know that we have people from both camps, but California is a microcosm of the United States as a whole. And it's one of the largest economies in the world. So legislation that we see coming out in California is often a precursor of stuff that's very likely going to show up for the rest of us in the United States. Again, love it, hate it. I'm not trying to take a position on that. But California is often ahead of the curve on legislation that a lot of us may see federally or in other states later. And, whether you agree with the legislation or not is kind of a moot point. But this week, California passed a major measure that focuses on children's online safety. And of course, so immediately you say, well, that can't be bad, right? I mean, there's no chance that is bad. And I don't think it's necessarily bad at all, but I do think it's an issue. So basically, if you've been under a rock or you live in a cabin in the woods and you just came out, the internet is a kind of dangerous place, right? I mean, and there's many different types of threats that are on the internet. We didn't have it when I was a kid, and we still managed to get in all sorts of trouble, up to and including setting the house on fire and, shooting rifles off the back porch and all those fun things that people used to do. And we lived. But the internet really brings a whole new perspective into this in terms of danger for not just for the children themselves, and it's certainly there's physical dangers of stalkers and pervs and lurkers and molesters and all those kind of people who are wanting to get to children. But there's also threats to adults via children, where if your child is coerced into doing something, obviously the bad things of the child being coerced into meeting someone somewhere is very, very terrible. But there's a lot of other ways that children can be coerced into doing things, by giving up bank account information or allowing access to a home computer or anything like that. And of course, all this stuff somewhat existed in the past because it could be done with telephones or certainly, people hanging around at the ice rink. Remember that guy? The guy that hung around at the ice rink who was like 35 years old, and you're like, who is that guy that's over there? And it was like the, really good skater or something. So maybe that was what. And I don't have to name the town that was happening in. The guy. But the internet has really enabled all these threats far more than ever before, and they've added a lot of new ones. And I could read the same thing about older people and even everybody in general, because I think we're all susceptible to this stuff at some level. But I mean, somebody could definitely talk a kid through exfiltration of bank account information or other data on a Zoom call, that they met in a game room or on a blog board or Discord or anywhere and said, hey, why don't we get together and talk? I can show you how to do this. And, and talk them into letting somebody have access. But anyway, this new law is called the California Age Appropriate Design Code Act. Yeah, great naming there. But it's an attempt, and I admire, the idea, but it's an attempt to hold companies responsible for how their services affect children's mental health and safety. Again, everybody's like, yay, that's a great idea. But I'm pretty cynical. And when I see these protect the children laws, in quotes, I get suspicious. They're always, every time I've ever seen one of these laws down through the history of the world, they were always doing this to protect us as children from, put something in the blank here. So I remember them protecting me from comic books. It's going to be the end of the world if we read comic books. Television was going to be the end of the world if we were allowed to watch television. Rock and roll was going to be the end of the world if we were allowed to listen to this horrible satanic music. I remember getting those lectures, in middle school about, the local constabulary would show up and start talking about how rock and roll leads to smoking marijuana, which leads to using heroin, which leads to worshiping Satan and all this. You think I'm making that up, but I actually was at that presentation where they went from listening to, Kiss was the band they were talking about, and how listening to Kiss would lead you to using, gateway drugs like marijuana, which would lead you to using heroin, which would lead you to working at the bus station glory hole and worshiping Satan. Yeah. And of course, all the kids are sitting there laughing. I mean, so what does this law do? Well, its targets are things like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. So immediately they go after the things that a lot of young people are using. And, immediately, of course, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter lobbied against the bill, saying it would prevent innovation and violate free speech and not really protect anyone from anything. Now, normally I'm not usually on their side because they're always in the interest of money. And I'm going to get to why I don't really like the way this law works. And I haven't read the entire statute, so maybe I'm overreacting. But the legislation explicitly in the law requires platforms to, quote, prioritize the privacy, safety, and well-being of children over commercial interests, end quote. Now, wait. So you're telling commercial companies that they can't act on their commercial interest and if it might somehow impact the well-being of children. Oh, dear. So I think I need a moment, from that to stop laughing about how ridiculous that is. I mean, you know how much I love vague legislation that says a business must prioritize well-being over commercial interest. I mean, what does that even mean? I mean, that solved it. No more evil now. Facebook will immediately fall in line and they'll never do anything, in their commercial interest ever again. And apparently then the bill goes on to say that companies that violate this law would be subject to civil fines of up to $7,500 per affected child or teen. Affected how? I'm like, so what do you mean? So some kid comes home from school and gets caught looking at porn, and they say, "Oh, we're going to blame Facebook for this." And every kid, I don't even know how they implement this law or how it's going to be implemented. I mean, it should be a very interesting courtroom battle over what this is. Can't wait to see the ads. And so this morning, I went and I Googled this act. And I immediately saw, and I did this the other day too when I was first looking at this. I did this the other day, and I didn't even see as many ads. Today, every single Google ad I could find, I went down like 3 pages, was from a law firm who was willing to act in your interest. I mean, they're already there, right? So, did your child see an ad on Facebook that may have affected your child? You may be entitled to compensation. Please call Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, and we will get right on the case. And, of course, this is going to result in a kerjillion class action suits against Facebook because every time little Johnny brings home a D- in math, the parent's going to say it was because of that damn TikTok, wasn't it? He's been watching that. And the law firm's going, yes, it is, ma'am. And we're here to represent you. For $7,500 a child, you could receive up to 60% of that money. I mean, will it help? At least based on what I read so far, it didn't look like it was going to help much. It was going to cause a giant mess. I mean, I hate laws like this because they don't work. They're vague, and they just result in massive numbers of lawsuits against companies that have absolutely no basis in anything other than somebody believes their kid is acting weird. Censorship, telling people they can't see something, that just guarantees the kids are going to see it for sure. I mean, I immediately went and read it. The minute I found out there were books that were banned in where I lived, I immediately went and read every single banned book that I got a teacher. I asked this teacher that I knew, and I said, what are the banned books? And she showed me a list, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go get every single one of these. And I read them. Breakfast of Champions was banned. Hell's Angels was banned, 2 of my favorite books. And I mean, I've read Breakfast of Champions hundreds of times, and look at me. I mean, I get it. You want to keep kids from being exploited, and I do too. And you want to keep companies from exploiting kids, and I'd like to go ahead and say I would rather they didn't exploit me either, even though I'm not a kid. It's a noble cause. And I guess someone, call them Moron Zero, thought that I was going to be harmed by reading Kurt Vonnegut. I don't know who that someone was and who made that determination. I think they're an idiot, and I think people that ban books are generally idiots. I don't think Kurt Vonnegut harmed me a single bit, but that real moron did a lot of people harm. So this law is not censorship per se. Well, it's indirect censorship. I think it's a well-meaning concept, but I'm worried that it becomes so vague that it's mostly going to end up benefiting class action lawyers in California because they're going to get, a big chunk of the money. I mean, all these companies are going to do a calculation. They're going to determine how much it costs to enforce this, how many kids under 18 are in California, what is the likelihood we're going to be sued, and by how many of those kids and for how much, and they're going to come up with a number, a la, the Ford Pinto, which was an infamous business case where Ford calculated the value of a human life and determined that the value they would have to pay for people dying was less than the amount they would have to pay out in lawsuits. And I know, I'm very cynical about all this because to me, it's like putting all the naughty magazines in plain brown wrappers like they did when I was a kid, and they put them up on the top shelf at the bodega, and all the kids are going, wonder what's up there. And it didn't keep anybody from seeing them because kids went out front and got some, gave some tramp money to go in and buy the magazines for them, and it really didn't keep anybody from seeing them except the adults that were afraid of them. So do kids need to be protected from commercial exploitation, selling their info and so forth? Oh yeah, massively. But will passing this law that says TikTok should prioritize the privacy, safety, and well-being of children in lieu of their commercial interest actually cause TikTok to do it? I'm sure they'll do something, but I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be. I mean, if they can track adults and they put a button on the page that says, don't look at this if you're not an adult, and click here to prove you're an adult, and you click it, well, I mean, I don't even know how that works out in court. I mean, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a licensed attorney anywhere, nor in California, and I did not read the letter, the chapter and verse of the statute, so who knows. But we need this kind of stuff, and we need it not just for kids, but we need it to be specific, and we need to have privacy defined, and it needs to be enforced. But I at this point, you're basically only protected if you go off in the wilderness and live in a cabin somewhere muttering about the government. So it's not just kids that are being exploited. So maybe it's a start. I don't know. But I think that they need to get more specific. And when you're being faced by the deep pockets of Facebook and so forth, it's going to be really, really hard to pass anything that has teeth in it. So I hope it protects kids in some way. But my feeling is the more we try to protect kids from the world, the harder the kids work at seeing the world. And the blocked off content just becomes a matter of interest. So, I mean, to the point it could even become an ad technique. I mean, when I was a kid, if you saw a movie marquee that said rated XXX, banned in 35 countries, many adults have suffered lesions of the brain just from watching a 5-minute clip of this movie. It was like, okay, we got to see this. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't sound like this is going to do much since I just don't think censorship stuff works. And it may teach your kid to be a hacker, though, to get around the child safety restriction on Spice TV. Was that what that was called? There was a thing called Spice TV. I remember people wanting to get around it. But anyway, I remember somebody asking me, how you get around that. Anyway, it's just my opinion of it, and you know what that's worth. And now the news. The 1st of October will mark the day that Microsoft will disable Basic Auth in Exchange Online. So if you're still using that, this is a date you might want to take note of. They have released multiple statements and warnings about this date arriving since September of 2019, when they first announced that they wanted to get rid of Basic Auth. Microsoft asked that customers toggle off Basic Auth in 2021. They actually went from, we're going to get rid of this. They actually sent out notices saying, please turn this off in 2021, and they sent another one out in May of 2022, and a lot of users did just that. There's also millions of tenants, which was also done, that were turned off by Microsoft in the meantime. These are, cloud-based things. But they said that unfortunately, even though a lot of people had gotten rid of it, the usage level of it was still not at zero. The announcement said that on the first day of October, they will randomly select tenants and begin disabling Basic Auth for MAPI, RPC, Offline Address Book, Exchange Web Services, POP, IMAP, Exchange, ActiveSync, and Remote PowerShell. If you don't know what Basic Auth actually is, it is an authorization technique that is used, and it is based in HTTP. So it used that Layer 7 protocol, and as we all know, HTTP is sent in the clear. Now, applications use this to authenticate by sending the credentials to the servers, to automatically validate things. And like when an email client is trying to download your email, it may send your credentials to the server to download your emails. If it's done using basic auth, it's sent in the clear, so that plain text can be looked at by anyone who can intercept that information, and that would include your usernames and passwords. Use of this approach is considered a very bad idea by most everyone I know, and it can easily result in man-in-the-middle attacks and so forth. Basic auth also creates issues to prevent you from using multi-factor because it makes it really, really hard to implement multi-factor at all. So if you haven't fixed this yet, or you think you may be using it, you may want to jump on this, or Microsoft may just do it for you on October 1st. The government of Chile's Computer Security and Incident Response Team, called CSIRT, announced that a ransomware attack affected a government agency in Chile. Yeah, I think it's Chile. The attack started on the 25th of August and targeted both the Microsoft-based and VMware ESXi instances that were being used by the government agency, who was unnamed. CSIRT said, quote, the ransomware would use Intru Encrypt, public key encryption algorithm, targeted to log files, executable files, DLLs, swap files, and virtual disk snapshot files, as well as virtual machine memory files, among other things that it does, and replaces the file extensions with .crypt. The malware contained functions for stealing credentials from web browsers, list removable devices for encryption, and evading antivirus techniques using an execution timeout that all ran before any kind of encryption was done. A 3-day deadline was presented to the government agency, and double extortion was used, double extortion being where they not only ransomware you with encryption, but they also threatened to leak all your files, and they were doing just that. And they threatened to sell the information from the agency on the dark web. All file extensions were replaced with .crypt. CSIRT did not attribute the attack to anyone, but according to the story, they said initially it looked like Red Alert ransomware, which uses that .crypt extension. But they went on to say it did not appear that it actually was Red Alert, but rather when the authors fed the details of the automated analysis system, or the details of the attack into an automated analysis system, it actually came back saying that it was possibly Conti. It also said inconclusive, which would imply maybe it's some other group altogether. So it could be Conti ransomware using another tool, or it could just be somebody else that kind of acts like Conti. Bleeping Computer said that this appears to be a new ransomware operation that launched at the beginning of August. There are links in the article to indicators of compromise for this ransomware, so if you're worried about it, and obviously it was successful in Chile, it probably will spread. So, maybe worth checking out. There's an Instagram phishing campaign that works by offering users a blue badge. If you don't know what a blue badge is, in many different services, like including Twitter and Instagram, a blue badge or a check mark or some other kind of badging is a sort of, honorific that alleges that your account is authentic, and they are typically only awarded on Instagram to celebrities and public figures or brands. So as you might guess, everybody wants to get one. The phishing email basically says that Instagram has reviewed your account and deemed that you brilliant bastard pleb, are going to be allowed finally to join the ranks of the glitterati and Instagram influencers that you admire so much. Celebrities and public figures will all know your name. And who knows, all your dreams may just come true, typical phishing. But once you fall for it, of course, you have to fill out a form. There we go. And the form basically tells you that you only have 48 hours to claim your badge, or the offer will be withdrawn. The new campaign was spotted by Vade, and they said they saw the first messages go out on the 22nd of July. The messages have Facebook and Instagram logos and lead to a request for, of course, your name, your email, your phone number, and then it takes you to another screen where you have to log in to your Instagram account to validate it and receive your badge, and then it tells you that in a few days, Instagram will be in touch to give you the actual badging. Definitely worth warning your people about. A lot of people use Instagram. And a lot of people want these badges. I know, on Twitter, it's the same way. People want the check mark and whatever to validate their account. Semantic Threat Hunting Team researched this issue and found that 1,859 applications contained hard-coded AWS credentials, with the majority being iOS. Only 37 of all the apps that they found were actually Android apps, so this is a very heavily iOS-leaning kind of thing. Essentially, 77% of the applications they found contained valid AWS access tokens that would allow direct access to private cloud services. So that means they've actually embedded the tokens in the code, as hard-coded credentials. 874 of the applications contained valid AWS tokens that could be used for accessing cloud instances, which actually contained live service databases that had millions of records in them. These kind of problems come up because basically it's negligence on the part of some developer, and a single SDK developer can actually end up embedding stuff like this in many, many different applications if their content is being used in other apps, and it turns into then a massive supply chain issue if it's well known that there's embedded credentials in an app. So it can be a real problem. I was auditing code one time, and I saw that their database login was hard-coded into the lines of code to make it work, was what they told me later. But because the credentials were also the server login and the router and switch logins and everything in the company at root, it basically meant I could get into everything in the company. And, they were like, well, I don't even know how you did this. And I'm like, yeah, I must be a genius. But it may be very difficult for you to determine if something you're using has these problems, but developers should be looking closely at things they're implementing. We've seen that, repeatedly now in the last few weeks. We've been talking about it with PyPy attacks, pushing things up that seem functional but actually have malware embedded in them and so forth. McAfee Security warned about 5 malicious Chrome extensions which are designed to track users' browsing activity and inject code into e-commerce platforms. The extensions have been installed more than 1.4 million times and can modify cookies on the e-commerce website such that the creator of this malware receives affiliate payments for the purchased items without the victims knowing anything. And I mean, normally you wouldn't know this happened and you probably wouldn't even suffer for it, but it's a way for them to cage money off of things. The 5 extensions are Netflix Party and Netflix Party 2, which allow people to share viewing Netflix things. Those 2 apps have been installed more than 1.1 million times. Flip Shop, which is a price tracker extension, and Auto Buy flash sales, which each have about 100,000 downloads, and full page screenshot capture, which had 200,000 installs. The malware behavior is in a script called b0.js, which is used to track data about the user, and when a new URL is opened on a tab, it grabs all your information. It basically then allows the developer to get a commission by injecting a cookie onto the e-commerce site that you're going to so that it looks like it was a click-through and then a payment needs to be made, and then that money is, of course, directed to the person who developed these extensions. In Japan, the newly appointed Minister of Digital Affairs has declared a war on floppy disks and other outdated media that is being used in the Japanese government. Taro Kano found that around 1,900 different business applications and other forms in Japan required the submission of a floppy disk or other media that is like, yeah, well, it's the government. According to a press conference, Kano said that the legal issues have prevented the modernization of many of these processes and that the government has really struggled with the legality of implementation of cloud-based data storage and other approaches in the past, so that office use of CDs, mini disks, floppy disks, and so forth was prevalent. Floppy disks are more than 50 years old. The most successful version of the floppy disk was a 3.5-inch, 1.44 meg floppy that was issued by Sony. Sony ceased manufacture of those disks in 2011. I still have a whole bunch, and Lou had all of his old Fortran routines on them, so yay. And finally, a painter named Jason Allen entered the Colorado State Fair Fine Arts Competition and announced that he had won first place in the Digital Arts Digitally Manipulated Photo category. Allen then announced that he had used Midjourney, which is a Discord server that runs off of an AI model like DALL-E, which is the one I've been playing with, which allows for you to type things like Rick and Morty as Fred and Barney, which I did, got a kind of an interesting result. It didn't turn out that well. The picture I got back was really strange, which is my favorites. And if you're watching the show, you can see that one. But with a lot of time and detailed descriptions, you can generate very, very cool things. Like my Rick Sanchez painted by Van Gogh worked out a lot better and got me this kind of wistful-looking Rick that I actually like a lot, really. So it's a fun thing, and if you spend enough time on it, you can get very detailed. Anyway, Alan used Midjourney, blew up the images, and printed them on canvas. and his image called Teatro de Opera Spatial, which is pretty cool. I really did like the image. Won the top prize. A lot of people got upset about this, but don't worry. In the 19th century, people panicked because the invention of the camera they thought it would obsolete painters and paintings, and of course that didn't happen. Dolly and Midjourney are fun. Give them a try if you're interested. And that is the wrap-up for the week of 28 August 2022. I'm Doug White. We're on holiday next week for Labor Day in the U.S., so we'll see you a week from Tuesday. Thanks for watching.